Last speaker of the day. And our last speaker of the day is Daniel Elizad. Longest title I have to read today, by the way, because it says here, Stanford Continuing Studies Instructor, Product Management for the IoT, Stanford University, and founder of Tech Product Management, by the way, a long URL.com. So without further ado, Daniel's going to talk to us about creating a strong story for end-to-end IoT products. So without further ado, please.
Thank you, Mike.
Sure.
Thank you.
You can stand behind this. If you want.
Can you hear me okay with this? Yeah, I don't know how that title ended up there, but anyway, thank you so much for joining me in the last session of the day. So I'm going to talk about creating a strong strategy for end-to-end IoT products. As Mike mentioned, my focus is on training IoT product managers. I'm a product manager myself that I've worked as head of products for IoT companies, so I want to share some of the lessons learned that I had through my practice and my experience. So probably you've seen this, the Gartner hype cycle for emerging technologies. And it's interesting to see that as of 2015, the Internet of Things was at the top of the hype. And this is good in a way, but it tells us that the next step is going all the way to the trough of disillusionment. And the question here for us, especially in this audience, is how do we avoid that? How do we make sure that we go and push the adoption of the industry forward and avoid this? So the challenge is that many companies lack a cohesive strategy to capitalize on the Internet of Things. And this has been a recurring topic throughout this whole conference. I've been hearing it a lot in the panels and in conversations with everybody. The question of, well, how do we actually do this? How do we actually get started? There is a lot of hype, especially in the consumer section. There's a lot of media articles, but very few people really dive deeper into, so now what? So what I want to do is I want to share with you some of the strategic challenges that I've seen in most companies. I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of product managers throughout Silicon Valley and actually the United States, and I've been able to see very specific patterns. So I want to share some of this with you and some ideas on how to approach them. By the way, if you have any questions at any time, please let me know. So some of the strategic pitfalls that I've seen, I'm going to share 3 with you today. The first one that I've seen that is one of the most common ones is not addressing a real customer pain. The second one is lack of focus on the company's core strategies, or sorry, core strengths. And number 3 is making inconsistent decisions across the end-to-end product. So here I'm talking about an end-to-end product, meaning all the way from the sensors and the hardware all the way to the application. And so I'm going to talk in more detail about each one of these. So let's get started with number 1. The question really that I ask a lot of people is, what pain does your product solve? Oftentimes, especially with something like IoT, it's all about the technology, right? We see it here a lot. People start with an engineering solution, with a new technology trend, and then it's a solution trying to find a problem. And that's where a lot of companies get stuck. The reality is that people don't buy IoT. They buy a solution to a problem. So from this perspective, IoT is nothing more than a tool. It's not a silver bullet. It's not what's going to solve all of our problems. It's just another tool that we have today to address the same type of challenges that companies have had forever. Maybe not forever, but in the recent history. And the idea is that now we might be able to provide a more innovative solution or something that is just cheaper, faster, better, right? But that's it. The whole idea is that we need to focus on an actual problem. So to do that, I want to share with you a story that I heard from a consumer product, but I think the lesson here is interesting for this audience. How many of you have seen this Brita Infinity water pitcher? Has anybody seen it? Yep, about half. So what it is this water pitcher that connects to the internet to provide some sort of value. And when the first time I heard about this, I thought, here we go again, right? Now my toaster is going to talk to my pitcher, it's going to talk to my fridge. What's the real value? But then I had the opportunity to listen in a panel to the product manager of this product. And the story that he told was very compelling. And it goes something like this. He mentioned that the problem that they're trying to solve for their customers is to have fresh water, pure water at all times. So they have this pitcher, and it has a removable filter. And then the filter wears off, and they need to buy another filter. But what's happening is that they don't have more filters at hand, and so therefore the pitcher is useless at that point. So they thought, how can we solve this problem? They started by including a little sticker with the pitcher that says, if you buy it today, in 3 months, remember to buy another filter. And so people were now aware that they needed to buy a filter, but 3 months later, they didn't have the filter, right? The warning was not enough. So they went through a different iteration, and they said, we're going to put a little chip there that measures the water as it is poured out, and it will blip and tell you visually that you need to change the filter, so you need to go buy filters. Guess what? People saw that blinking thing, and they still didn't have the filter. And so that's when they decided to take a look at IoT and try to take the product further. And so what they did is that they integrated that chip, and so when the filter runs out, it actually connects to Amazon Dash, to your account, and it orders filters for you, and they arrive at your house before you need them. So in reality, it solves the problem of not having filters. And one of the comments that stuck with me was that the product manager said, I never thought I was going to be in the IoT world. All I knew is that I needed to solve this problem for my customers, and IoT turned out to be the way to do it. So I thought that was an interesting idea. And so from an industrial perspective, some of the things that, an example that I can share is, for example, this wind turbine. We hear a lot about monitoring and predictive maintenance. And so one of the things that I see lacking a lot of times, it's an actual target audience that you want to sell your product to. I talk to a lot of different IoT vendors, and I ask them, so who's your audience? Well, I mean, it's everybody, because everybody can actually use my platform or my hardware. And you have to narrow down. So in this example, I'm saying, okay, the target for a monitoring solution is a large wind farm, and I'm defining large as 100 and plus, right? Because sometimes we go into large, and large could be anything from 2 to 1,000, right? The problem statement, after talking to a lot of customers, this product manager decided, okay, this is a problem, revenue lost due to unplanned maintenance. And then the value proposition, the strategy that can solve that problem could be increase revenue by predicting when maintenance is needed, ordering parts, and scheduling maintenance before it breaks down. So notice that the solution here is not to monitor the turbine, right? The idea is to increase the revenue, because that is what's really the problem, addressing the problem statement. So if you focus on solving that problem statement, then the solution from the technology perspective is kind of laid out for you. So with that in mind, one of the things that I've seen is that a lot of companies get that solution, but they fall short of providing the real value. Sometimes companies just focus on adding sensors, acquiring a ton of data, putting it to the cloud, and just showing it to the customer. So in this example with the wind turbine, notice that I'm not focusing on just predicting maintenance. It's going back to the breed example, right? Don't just tell me that my wind turbine is going to need service. Order the parts and schedule the technicians, fix the problem for me. And this is the business models that some companies are starting to require from vendors, like really own the solution all the way and help me all the way. And that's part of the challenges with IoT, is that it's this combination of product and the service to fulfill that. Another example for energy solutions, let's say in smart buildings, don't just show me energy consumption. I can do that. Control the environment to help me save energy. That is really going to the guts of the problem. Or for security systems, don't just communicate that a break-in is happening, just lock the doors and call the police. Really help me out, right? And so this is part of the strategy of what your product needs to do, is to go all the way to solve the problem. Granted, you might not be able to go all the way in an initial iteration of the product, but as you evolve, that's what your customer is going to be valuing, and that's how you can differentiate your offering from other vendors. So moving on to the second strategic challenge that I want to share with you is focusing on your core strengths. As we all know here, IoT is very complicated from a technology perspective. The IoT technology stack has these components. It has device hardware, device software, communications, cloud platform, and cloud applications. One of the biggest challenges that I see companies going into is they want to build everything themselves. Because when they think about IoT, they think IoT has all these components, therefore I need to provide all these components, not only provide them, but I need to build them. And so all of a sudden you have software companies getting into hardware companies trying to build their own cloud, etc. And it becomes really complicated. Big companies are going to lose a lot of money and time, but they can recover. In fact, talking to a lot of the platform providers, they say that most of their customers are companies that have failed trying something on their own, and then they come to them. But if you're a small company or a startup, you're going to run out of cash, and you won't be able to solve the problem. Right? So the question here to solve this strategic challenge is focus on build, buy, or partner. So based on everything that you need to provide to your customers, focus on where your company adds value. Right? If you're a software company, focus on that and then partner on the rest. If you're a hardware vendor, focus on that, partner on the rest. What is your business model? What are the people, skills, and financial resources that you have? If you've never delved into embedded development, and you don't have embedded developers, you only have cloud developers, that's a very different workflow, skill set that you might not have. So that's a good thing to outsource. Right? Your time to market, right? If you have a lot of time, then sure, try it all yourself, right? But in this day and age, get a good partner and accelerate time to market. The idea is to pilot your solution and start refining it as soon as possible. And of course, focus on what's already available to buy. Don't reinvent the wheel. We've heard that theme all over again, right? Here in this conference. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's no need, really, because it's really hard for a company that focuses on a specific area to create IP and differentiated value in a different area. So to do that, I want to do this example with you. So let's assume that you are the head of product of a company that does a face recognition algorithm. And you are the leader in the market, and you've determined by talking to a lot of customers that there's an opportunity for you selling to the government for surveillance, and you're doing face recognition on the streets like that camera, right? So let me ask you this. If we walk through the IoT technology stack, talking about hardware, the hardware that's going to run your algorithms, it's a camera like that. So would the company build the camera? Like, would you go into the business of building cameras? What do you say? No, right? Because that's completely foreign to you and everybody. You're going to spend all your money there. Right? So going up the IoT technology stack, the device software, the embedded software that runs inside the camera, do you build that? Do you buy that? What do you think? Anybody? Exactly, depends on when your algorithm runs. So let's say that it runs at the edge. So that's your IP, right? That's where you really add value. So definitely you gotta own that part. Then going up, there's a communications stack. Do you build your own networking protocols and your own network? Or do you find something that's already existing? Right? You find something that's already existing. In fact, you research and figure out what infrastructure your customer has and figure out what is it that they're gonna make it easy to deploy into that infrastructure, right? Moving on to the cloud platform, should you build your own data centers and your own cloud platforms? No, right? Maybe you can have another portion of your algorithms running in the cloud, but that's about it. And same with the cloud applications. Although you're a software company, do you build your own mobile apps? Maybe, maybe not, right? Because that might be a distraction. If you are purely an algorithms company, that's where your value is, right? So of course, this is an extreme example, but what I'm trying to show you is that the fact that this company is focusing just on those algorithms doesn't diminish that they are providing value to their customers through an IoT solution. It's just how they decide to approach it. And then the last portion is how to make consistent decisions across the IoT technology stack. IoT is particularly complicated because you have software and hardware and cloud and embedded, but also you have very different types of customers, different users, different groups, different processes, etc. Right? So how do you actually pull it all together as an organization? if you think about the product management lifecycle, the different steps that are required to build any product, regardless of your process, right? Could be agile or lean or waterfall, it doesn't matter. These steps always apply. You're going to have some ideation and research stages, a portion of product strategy, road mapping, planning, development, and release, right? So I'm going to talk about two specifically. On the product strategy side, that's where you define your target audience, your problem statement, positioning, things that we've been talking about. And then on the roadmap, of course, you're going to build what your product is going to look like, but also define your minimum viable product, what you're going to launch first that adds value, prioritize, do some cost analysis, etc. Pretty straightforward product stuff. But what I've seen is that in IoT, getting from product strategy to the planning stage is very complicated because there are all these different factors that I mentioned. There's different types of groups, hardware, software, all these different business models. So that's the part that I see most companies struggle with. I've actually, in my own practice, I've developed a framework to help bridge that gap, and I call it the IoT decision framework. So let me show you what I mean by that and how it can help with this strategy process. So it's basically a strategic tool to help us bridge that gap and make sure that all your decisions throughout your product are consistent. So it has two parts. First is the technology stack, and although we shouldn't lead with technology, it's easier for us to have a way to point at the technology blocks to do all the other decisions. So we have the technology stack that I mentioned, and then we have what I call the 6 decision areas. And so the 6 decision areas where product managers need to make those decisions are UX, user experience, data, business, technology, security, and standards and regulations. So the idea is to walk through these different areas in that order to make sure that you understand all the different decisions that you need to make to build your product. So for example, in the decision area for UX, the question that you're trying to answer is, who are my users and what are their needs? And then through the framework, you're going to evaluate that at each level of the IoT technology stack. So for example, who are my users at the device hardware, at the device software level, communications, cloud platform, etc. And what experience do you want to do that? Especially in industrial applications, there are a lot of different users, right? There are installers and technicians and operators and network engineers and the end users and the boss, right? So you have to identify what experience you want for all of that. Once you understand who are your users, based on those needs, you can decide what data flows throughout the whole stack. What data needs to be acquired at the hardware level, what data needs to be processed at the edge, what data needs to flow through the communication channels, processed in the cloud, etc. Then we go into the business. So now that we understand the data that's going to flow, it's time to ask, how are we going to make money out of this? So this is where you figure out your business models, your monetization models. Are you going to monetize a solution or each layer of the stack, cost, build versus buy decisions? And then the next layer is technology. Notice that technology is actually the 4th layer, because unless you understand your users and their needs, and you understand what data flows through the stack, and how are you going to make money, you can't start thinking about technology. So now here you focus on what technology do you need in order to deliver this solution. The next stage is security. And the question here is, how will you secure each layer of the IoT technology stack? So what are the risks at the device hardware layer, at the device software, communications, etc. Now, notice that although security comes later in the framework, it doesn't mean that it's an afterthought. You should be able to finish this whole planning before you even start building anything. So this ensures that you have thought about security from the very, very beginning in conjunction with technology and data and business. Okay? And then last and not least is standards and regulations. What standards should we use and what regulations are going to be affecting the decisions that I make throughout my product? And once you go through all that, the key here is to iterate. Because the challenge here is that each one of these layers is related to one another. So the decisions that you make in the data section, for example, are going to impact your cost and are going to impact the technology that you choose. And so if for some reason you decide to use a different type of technology, then you have to go back and see Okay, will this affect the experience that I want to provide my users? Does this affect the data that I want to use, etc.? So by iterating a couple of times, you're able to come to a steady state where all your decisions are consistent. And this is what I mean by getting consistency in your strategy, because what I often see is that some teams want a user experience that is this way, and then the finance team come up with a business model this way, and the engineering comes with this technical solution, and they do not match. And so you can't really move forward. So either you won't reach your ROI targets, or it's not implementable, or the experience is terrible, etc. So the idea is to go through each of the layers horizontally to be asking all those questions throughout the stack. But it also gives you an opportunity to have a unified way to talk to the specific teams. So for example, if you look at it vertically, then you can talk to the hardware team specifically and convey the vision and how their portion of the development fits in the overall strategy. What UX they're going to be developing or requiring, data, business, technology. And so you can do that for those, each of the teams, right? And so communicating the vision and communicating the strategy throughout all the different teams is important. So having a framework like this helps you have a common language that all these different teams can point to and understand not only their requirements and commitments, but how they fit into the bigger picture. It can help you as an evangelization tool. So when can you use this framework? When you're creating new products from scratch, of course, but you can also use it when you're defining new features. So you can very quickly go through the framework, and let's say the sales guy comes and say, you know what, we could close this account if we could only measure temperature in our edge device. Oh, great, okay, what does that affect the experience? How does that affect cost? How does that affect their technology that we have, etc. Right? So very quickly you can calibrate those things. If you are considering product line extensions, or evaluating potential partnerships. Where do you want to do the build versus buy? What are going to be the interfaces? And what's going to be the experience that you expect from each of the people? What data is going to flow to each of the partners? What are the business models with the partners, etc. So in summary, creating a solid end-to-end IoT product strategy is based on making sure that you solve your customers' pains, you focus on your core strengths, and you make consistent decisions. I want to open it up for questions. I also want to mention, if you want to learn more about my approach and the IoT decision framework, you can get in touch with me. I have an online course that's coming out as well. So talk to me about it if you're interested. And other than that, thank you so much. Any questions? Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So how would you respond to that sort of strategy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think if I may, I can go back quickly to the product development lifecycle. And as I was mentioning, this is the part where I believe this framework can help in that transition. So I see competitive analysis happening at the product strategy separately in advance, and it's just an input to the framework so that you can figure out how that's going to go. That's where I would put it. Is that similar to what you do, how you do today?
Yeah.
How do you do it today? Yeah, I would love to know.
How do we do which part? The strategy part?
The market analysis and how it blends to the strategy and goes to the execution part.
I think we are trying to get those pieces together. I think we get a really good summarizing.
Thank you.
Kind of what needs to happen. Visual format of the those are all the things we dealt with. But, and
Yeah.
specifically the IoT staff part where we're trying to do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually, it's our strength is in the
Yeah, that's a good point. And I've had some conversations with Honeywell folks, and I think that what I've found useful of having a framework like this is just the ability to communicate what are the different pieces that you need to address. Right? Of course, I went through this in a 15-minute presentation, but this process could take 6 months, right? And coordinating with all different teams and figuring out, going out what the strategy is. But
And even before that, the research piece is another piece that I
yes,
think is
exactly.
because we're trying to kind of stand up research as we look at design, but that's the piece.
Yes, that's a good point. And I think that it's important to mention that this cycle could be a very lean cycle. So it's not that it can take 10 years to go through the whole thing to first launch. You can do this in a month. And now there's so many IoT prototyping tools that you can get from a conception to a mini prototype to show it to customers fairly quickly. And so as long as you have a common language that you can share with your teams and explain to executives what is it that you're doing and why are you doing it, that I think I find that beneficial.
Yeah, and we're really, I think our org structure also really on that.
No comment. Any other questions? Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you for staying here in the last session.